So next is data type. So as we discussed, in Java it's mandatory to mention the data type at the time of variable declaration. Okay, so how many different data types we have? Now you can just think about which type of values we can use. So we can use like integer type value 10. We can use any name, right? Let's say I'm using here testing in the double quotes. They can be one single character in the single quote. There can be true and false values. There can be some decimal values. Okay, so which type of data type is available in Java? So here this is of integer type value. This is our string type value. This is character. Now just keep in mind S is in uppercase and these are in the lowercase. This is our Boolean value and it is kind of decimal values, but again having some specific data type known as double. So there are, other than these data types, we have further more data types. So we will discuss. So first of all, we'll check the how many different data types we have in Java. Two type of data types. One is primitive data type. Another one is non-primitive data type. Now, what do you mean by primitive and non-primitive? So the primitive data types are those data types where we can store one single value. Within that we can store one single value. Okay, the non-primitive data type where we can store the collection of things. Collection of things mean to say, here if I'm talking about string, so this is the collection of characters. It is any class. Arrays, array where we can store the again multiple values of similar data type. This is again one class. So under the non-primitive part, we consider the classes, any interfaces, right, which can store the multiple values. Here we can store the multiple values of similar data type. And in the primitive, we can just store one single value. In the primitive, can store single value. Now let's see out of these which are the primitive or non-primitive data type. So let's check it out. So integer, here we can just store the one single value in a variable. So this is our primitive data type. String, that is the collection of character, number of characters are there. So this is the non-primitive data type. Character, here we can store just one single value. So this is again our primitive data type. Boolean, you can store just true and false. We are writing true, but machine understand it's 1. So again here we can store just one single value. So this is primitive data type. Again in this variable d we are using single numeric value. So this is again primitive data type. So primitive data type where we can store one single value, non-primitive where we can store multiple values. It can be in the form of collection of characters or the multiple values in the form of array or the collection of objects. So all these comes under the non-primitive data type. So let's first discuss about the primitive data type in detail. So here you can see the one chart where we have different data types. All these are the primitive data types. Now here primitive data type has been categorized into the different types. Here you can see all these comes under the integer type, and under the float we have two different data types, one for the character and another for the Boolean. So you have to just learn all these data type in the sequence. Byte is there, short is there, integer and long, that comes under the one category, that is integer. For the floating point or for the decimal values, here we have two data types. For the decimal values, we have float and double. To store the character, we have character. To for the true and false, we have Boolean value. Now let's see how we can understand and what is actual difference between all these data types. So let's discuss about the integer first. So here you can see in this table the memory used is there, like how many bytes it will take by the byte, short, integer and long, and what is the range, up to which range or up to which value it can store the value within the one type of variable. So let's discuss. So over here the first category is byte. So byte consumes 1 byte. 1 byte is equivalent to 8 bits. Presentation is like 1, 2, 4, 8, 16, 32, 64 and 128. So this is the, here if you considering the 8 bit, that means 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay, so in that case the 1 byte, whenever you create any variable of byte type, internally the JVM that consumes the 1 byte, it's fixed. Okay, now its range is -128 to 127. Now here you can see also the range is 1 to 128, so it's considered -128 to 127 value. Correct? So in that case the maximum range is, in the positive value, the maximum range is 127. If you are trying to store the value in a byte variable, byte is equal to 128, it will give us the error because its range is up to 127 only. Okay, so that can consume only 1 byte. Short consumes 2 bytes, mean to say 16 bits. Okay, double the memory of byte. Integer consumes 4 bytes. For the long, the spaces or the memory used is 8 bytes. So in that way you can learn this sequence: byte, short, int and long. Byte consume 1 byte, that means 8 bits, short 2 bytes, int 4 bytes and long 8 byte. So now the question is where we use long type values. Mostly you have seen we use the int type values, right? But these type of the data types we use according to our requirements. Daytime time functionality, you have to store the values, then over there we use long values. Okay, so all these comes under the integer type values. Moving to the next one, we have float and double. So the float consumes 4 bytes, and here you can see its range also, and the double that consume 8 bytes. So sometime in the interview they ask such kind of questions like how many bytes can be consumed by the long. For the character that consume 2 bytes, Boolean consume only one single bit, because true represents here 1 and 0, false represents 0. All these comes under the primitive data types. So let's see the practical. Let's create a class and we can write the class name data types demo. Enter it, and you can create one main method here again. And now this time we will cover all the primitive data types, and first we'll cover the integer type. Integer. Okay, so in that case first type is byte, so here we can use b. Its value is 10. As we checked, its value or its range is from -128, so it is not giving us any error. So if I print this thing, system.out.println, and print the variable, So in that case, whenever you execute this, we will get the output minus 128, because that is within the range. Okay, for the positive value, if you are using 127, again it's okay, there is no compilation error and we are getting the value. What if its value is exceeding its range? So in that case, 128. It is saying the 128 is out of its range. You can't store this type of value in byte. So now this time it is considering the next type, that is short, because short having maximum range and that can consume the more memory than the byte. So in that case it is not allowing to store this value in this variable, so it is giving us the error. So its range is minus 128 to 127. So within that range, if you have to define any value, then definitely you can go with the byte. Otherwise, you can take another type, short. Short, where you can see the value more than this 128. 128 up to the specific range that we have read in the table. Okay, so to define the short type variable, you can just go with this one, and here you can just enter the random value. It is still storing this value. If you are trying to store this value 32,000, again that is within the range, but if you are trying to store this value 33,000, again now it's throwing an error. This is out of range. Okay, so the next type, if you want to store the value more than 32,000, then in that case we can go with the another type of variable, that is integer. So in that case I'm using int, variable name is I, and now you can store the value. If let's say you want to store the value 35,000, so here we can change the variable name. Let's try to increase the value. Now it is exceeding its range. So now within that range you can just use the value. So if you want to store the large type values, then over there the next type we have long. If you want to store such type of value, then you have to mention L over there. Up to this range you can store the value. So L stands for long here. Okay, so you can just print these variables to check the output, and here we can see the L. So let's execute it, and here you can see the output. So this is all about the primitive integer type variables. Now the next thing is, next type we have, that is floating type values, or you can say decimal type values. So under the decimal type values we have two types. One is float, where we can use, let's say x is equal to, we are using the value .5. Now here the question is why it's giving us the error, because this is the decimal value and we are using the proper data type as well. So we have seen in the table the two types, one is the float and another one is double. Okay, so over here it is throwing the error, but for the double value that is not giving any error. So what is the reason? So Java consider it as a double value. So we can't store the double value in the float type variable. So to represent the float value we have to use F here. Okay, so F stands for floating value, because the float consumes only how much bytes? 4 bytes. And a double that consume 8 bytes memory. So there is no need to mention anything, but in case of the float, if you are trying to store the value, then definitely you need to mention the F. Otherwise, by default Java will consider it as a double value, so we can't store the double type value in the float type variable. Okay, so this is the floating type. So moving to the next one, we have character type. So how we can create the character type variable? So here you can use ch, and that should be in the single quote, that should be in the single quote. But if you are trying to store this in the double quote, again it will throw one error. Reason being, because in Java, the string only we can define in the double quotes. If you are defining any value in the double quote, then on the left hand side, the data type should be string only. So the character, you can just use the single quotes. And second thing, you can't store the multiple characters in the single quotes, obviously, because if there are more than one character, then that becomes a string, and string should be in double quotes, and for the string the data type should be string only. Okay, so in that case, let's print this also. So here you can write ch, and for this we can write here x, and for this one we can write y. So I'm just printing all these variables. Simple. So moving to the next one, the Boolean type value. So how we can create the Boolean type variable? So its data type is Boolean, and you can use any variable, let's say BL, and there is no need to use any single quote or double quote. So these are the kind of which consume only one bit value. So true stands for 1 here. So we can't use the 1. In few languages, 1 considered as a true and 0 considered as a false. But in Java, we need to mention true without any quotes. Okay. So in that case, if you are trying to print this thing, but the interpreter consider it as one value. So in that case, you can just print BL. So we have covered all the data types. Under the integer types, we have byte, short, int, and long, and byte, which consumes 1 byte, short, it consumes 2 bytes, and integer 4 bytes, long 8 bytes. Okay, for the floating point, that again consumes 4 bytes and 8 bytes, and this consume 2 bytes, boolean 1 bit. Okay, so here true stands for true is equivalent to 1 and false stands for 0. So let's execute this program. So here you can see all the values. So this is all about the variables and the data types, how we can declare.